Trek Profiles Podcast, Episode 7, recorded July 2018. This is the Trek Profiles Podcast, where each episode we sit down with a Star Trek fan. We learn their story, and then we try to figure out why this show means so much to them, to us, and to all the Trekkies. I am John, your intrepid host of this whole enterprise, and I welcome you to this, the Trek Profiles Podcast, Episode 7. If you wish to get in touch with us, you can reach us at feedback@trekprofiles.com or on Facebook or Twitter at TrekProfiles. Warning! As we record this, we have reached the end of Season 1 of Star Trek Discovery, so all previous Trek content up to and including that point is fair game and may be discussed during this episode. You have been warned, human. Right here with me is my amazing co-host, the ever-vigilant and slightly mischievous and marginally devious M5 Multitronic unit. Greet the listeners, M5.
M5 standing by. All functions within acceptable parameters.
Good to hear, M5. What are the messages for this episode?
Communications displayed.
The Trek Profiles Podcast is a proud member of the Tricorder Transmissions Network. There is literally something for everyone at Tricorder if you're a Star Trek fan. If you're keeping up with the Star Trek novels, you should check out the interview that our Reading Trek hosts, Marty Ali and William Conlon, did with James Swallow, author of the most recent Trek novel, Fear Itself. If you enjoy this or any of these other shows and you wish to support the network, you may do so through Patreon. We started doing Patreon Hangouts. They are so much fun. We have the next one scheduled for Tuesday, July 17th at 9 Eastern, 6 Pacific. If you'd like to attend, check your emails from Patreon for details. Another way you can support this or any of our shows is to visit the show pages in iTunes and give us a nice rating and review while you're there. And if you aren't an iTunes user, that's okay too. We'd appreciate your rating and review in whatever platform you use. These reviews help other fans find our shows, and we appreciate them so very much. The network is also planning a whole bunch of events for Star Trek Las Vegas this year. We're going to have swag, events, and a bunch of other things. One delightful event will be the Night of Diversity party on Saturday night. It'll start around 8 p.m. in the party room at the Kiss Mini Golf at the Rio. There'll be raffles, prizes, and a lot of fun to be had, and in addition, all the funds from the event will go to two amazing charities. The Center, which is the Gay and Lesbian Youth Community Center for Southern Nevada, and The Crib, a Chicago-based LGBTQ youth shelter. So come on out and support these wonderful charities, and have a great time while you're at it. See you there. I had an email this week from listener Helen, who is in an undisclosed location. She says she loves the show, and she wants to know how she can be a guest on the podcast. Well, first of all, Helen, thank you for your email. Second, I have several kinds of things that the M5 and I look for when we invite guests. Most importantly, they have to have a good Star Trek story to tell. As my listeners know, I tend to go deep with people, and they have to have something to say about Star Trek that's meaningful. I want to talk to all different types of Star Trek fans. I'm always especially looking for the ones that we may not know about, who are not as active or in social media or active at all. I want to make sure to find them and include them too. Star Trek can be for everyone, not just for people with lots of followers. Also, they have to be willing to talk to me and open up. Some people do find it a bit intimidating to be interviewed like this. I do what I can to make it easy, but a few people have backed out because of nerves or being afraid of saying something wrong on the show. I've done my best to show that we're positive, and people have to make the choices that are right for them. So that's it, really. I'm pretty well booked up for the immediate future, but if you'd like to offer yourself as a guest, send me an email and tell me your Star Trek story. feedback@trekprofiles.com. Okay. Kobayashi Maru time. These are the questions from Episode 5 with the amazing Crystal Pisano. Question 1. You're about to graduate Starfleet Academy. You can request a slot at Deep Space Nine or on the Enterprise D. What do you ask for? Crystal said the Enterprise D, and let's face it, you cannot go wrong with a classic. Most of you agreed with her, 62 to 38%. It seemed most of you picking Deep Space Nine really just wanted to hang out at Quark's anyways. Question 2. You're at a restaurant on shore leave. You need a little pick-me-up. They have Roctagino and the Vulcan Mocha on the menu. What'll you have? Crystal picked the Roctagino, and so did all of you by 72 to 28%. It was the emotional choice and not the logical one, it appears. You want to spin at the Dabo tables. Congratulations. You can take your winnings either as 10,000 ISIX or 10 bars of gold pressed latinum. Which one do you take? Crystal picked the latinum, and so did you, my Ferengi friends, 92 to 8%. Question 4. Your personal replicator is broken. Oh no. You can take it either to Chief O'Brien or to B'Elanna Torres to get it fixed. To whom do you take it? Crystal said B'Elanna was her choice, but alas, the listenership chose Miles O'Brien, 69 to 31%. I guess y'all were thinking that Miles has a lot more experience fixing replicators based on what we saw in Deep Space Nine. Question 5. You're considering a life change. To help think through this and what it will mean, you want to undergo a ritual. Will it be the Kolinar, in the hopes of becoming a being of perfect logic, surrounded by stoic, meditating Vulcans? Or will you undergo a Klingon rite of ascension where you'll be tormented by waves of angry Klingons with pain sticks? Crystal went full Vulcan and selected the Kolinar, and Kolinar appeared to be the logical choice of the listenership by 64 to 36%. If you're interested in weighing in on the Kobayashi Maru questions, be sure to follow me on Twitter, where you can also vote in the questions from this very episode. All right, that's it for messages and communiques. Let's move on. M5, let's run the intelligence profile for this week's guest, and let's start the show.
M5 will comply.
Her favorite character is Jadzia Dax, and her favorite ship is the Discovery, because duh, they're spinning. Her favorite non-human race is the Vulcans, because they aspire to a logical nature that she also desires. You can find her on the Twitter at LLA Posper. She is currently located in the Mile High City, Denver, Colorado, North America Earth, in Sector 001. It's Heather Barker. Welcome, Heather, and thanks for being on my podcast.
Well, thanks for having me. This is something that I've wanted to do for a long time. So I am slightly nervous. I've got the podcast jitters, but I'm sure they will go away here soon.
You're a podcaster, Heather. How could you possibly have jitters? This is not your first rodeo.
It's not my first rodeo, but this, I'm pretty open in my podcasting. I'm an open book in general, but, Trek Profiles is a dip into who we are on a very personal level. And I just want to make sure that I'm able to share the things that are important to me in an eloquent way. And I don't always do that when I'm super passionate and emotional. So that's where the anxiety comes from.
Well, this is an anxiety-free zone, but why don't you banish those feelings for now? Take a deep breath. Will you take my hand and go with me on this journey? Did you see what I did there? Did you see what I did?
I love it. I love it. Let's podcast for science.
All right. Outstanding. So, time for question 1. Heather, are you a Star Trek fan?
I am such a Star Trek fan.
How long have you been a Star Trek fan?
Oh, that's a loaded question.
It's not a loaded question. It's a factual question.
It's a question that has a little bit of a long answer, so pardon me. I will try not to take up the whole podcast telling this story.
No, go for it.
I used to be very self-conscious about telling my Star Trek story and talking about when I got into Star Trek, because there is a stigma around fans that come in with the JJ verse, which it's my goal to get rid of the stigma, because I truly believe that it doesn't matter when you become a Star Trek fan. It only matters that you are a Star Trek fan. I have been a science fiction fan since I was small. I was born in rural Kentucky and raised in a pop culture environment that didn't involve Star Trek. But I watched things like Sequest ages ago when I was younger. And I think around that same time, I think this was, I don't know, it was 9 or 10, somewhere in there. I remember seeing Star Trek on TV. And the very sad thing is that by then I already had it in my head that Star Trek was for nerds. And I was not a nerd. And of course I was a nerd. I've always been a nerd. I watched a little bit of Voyager, and I could not suspend my belief enough to dismiss the fact that it was just kind of poorly written. Whatever episode it was, I don't remember, but I didn't like it. And I was like, okay, well, I don't like Star Trek, but I loved Stargate. I liked Star Wars, lots of science fiction in my youth. It wasn't really until I met my ex-husband, and he was a Star Trek fan. He grew up, his mom was a huge Star Trek fan, so he grew up watching it and exposed me to Star Trek, We started watching Enterprise together. I made it through 2 seasons and lost interest. Unfortunately, right before Enterprise gets pretty good.
Well, let me ask you a question. Was that
yeah.
was that Enterprise in broadcast, or was that on DVDs or streaming or something?
It was broadcast. So we would sit down and watch it every night that it aired. I don't think we had a DVR yet when that happened. And unfortunately, I don't think that Enterprise is the best Star Trek to introduce women fans to. I don't think that the women in Enterprise are treated as well as they could be as characters. I mean, T'Pol is great and Hoshi are great, but I don't, especially Hoshi, I don't think her full potential was realized or given due justice. There were a few episodes where it was, but overall, it's just not a great starting point for women. You'd think that, Voyager would have been if I had enjoyed that 20 minutes of the episode I watched when I was young.
Well, I do have to stand up for Mirror Hoshi because after all, she becomes Empress.
She does become Empress, but that's a whole other rabbit hole to go down with how that character is portrayed. I'm just not a huge fan of how they used her. But yes, I'm glad that at least she became Empress in the end. So somewhere around that time, Nemesis came out too. And so I went to the theater. So Nemesis was my first Star Trek movie in the theater. And at that point, I had not seen all of TNG. I'd seen some of it, but I didn't know the characters very well. And so I liked the movie.
You're allowed. That's okay.
I need to go. I know it gets such a bad rep. I need to go back and give it a good watch. I love Tom Hardy. I love Tom Hardy now, but I have fond memories of skinny little Tom Hardy.
Right.
I thought he did a really great job. He was a good actor then. He's a great actor now. So that movie has a special place in my heart. It's not my favorite Star Trek movie of all time, but that was the first Star Trek film I saw in the theater. So fast forward, this is what, like 5 years or so when I moved to Colorado, and it's 2009, and so the JJ movie is about to come out, and I spent most of that year prior to the movie coming out watching all of Star Trek except the animated series. So every series that was available, we binge watched together. I slept through some of it.
Oh, no, it's Trek Confessions now.
Yes, it is. Sad to admit. Well, everyone has a story, and fortunately, since then, I have watched all of Star Trek and not slept through it. But I will say that DS9 especially, just the noises in the shows, there's something about them that's just very comforting and is nice to fall asleep to. But anyway, saw the movie. The movie was phenomenal. I loved it. I was crying in the first, 5-10 minutes when the ship is blowing up and Winona is having Kirk. I loved it. I loved the whole thing. And so we're like, all right, I had managed a comic book store previously when I lived in Florida. So I was kind of immersed in convention culture at that point. I'd worked at several, but I'd never attended just a Star Trek convention. And so that's when we found Star Trek Las Vegas. And so we went that year and my life changed, and we will talk about that later. But obviously, since seeing the first JJ movie, since watching all of the Star Trek series then, since getting involved in the Star Trek community, I have gone full Trekkie. And to this day, I run a group for the Star Trek convention. I help run a network for Star Trek podcasts. I attend the STLV every year. My life is Star Trek, and we'll talk about this more later, but Star Trek has now saved my life. So if anyone asks me if I'm a fan, Star Trek is in my blood. And I didn't start off watching Star Trek when I was a kid. It doesn't matter if you do. I'm really proud now to tell my Star Trek origin story because so many other people came into Star Trek through conventions, through the JJ movies, and now through Discovery. And that just makes me really happy. The more Star Trek there is, the more fans we can invite into this great big house that Roddenberry built.
So I have to ask if you've seen the animated series now and if you are a full-on completist and have your Star Trek merit badge.
Yes, I don't have a badge. When do I get it?
I'll put it in the mail right away.
I did watch the animated series on the Tricorder Transmissions. We do the original mission, and I got involved. I don't remember if it was the beginning of the animated series, but we've done several podcasts about the episodes. We're still going through those, so I've seen it all. I happen to really enjoy the animated series. A lot of people don't like the style of the art. I think it's a beautiful series. I love the art. The episodes are wild, but go check out the Gold Key comics because those are even wilder. I think that the animated series is pretty cool.
I'd agree with you that wild is a good term to use to describe some of those episodes, because whenever I watch episodes, there's all this meta stuff that goes through my head, and I'm always thinking about the production and the writing and, what the business people at the studio would say. And I'm watching some of those animated episodes and I think, I cannot believe that someone thought this would be like a Saturday morning kids cartoon, because it is totes not.
I certainly have wondered what drugs they were doing, because some of them are so far out there, specifically what the magics of Megas 2 is. Yeah, I was not super fond of it when I did the podcast. Now I just think that it's crazy. So props to my buddy Adam Drosen for being a champion for that episode, and I'm on his side now.
Fantastic. So you are a completist. When Discovery came on, and I know that you had a lot of life changes going on, but I want to ask the question this way. How do you prefer to watch Star Trek, in a group or by yourself?
Oh, so I had the opportunity to watch it with a group and I declined. I didn't watch it alone. When it started, I had one partner who was not as excited about it as I was. So to be quite honest, I think I would have rather watched it completely alone. The nice thing is that while we sat down and watched it together, and we watched it via the PlayStation on a big screen TV, I got to go watch it a second time directly after. So my preferred way of watching now normally is alone. Let's fast forward to the end of the season, and I have gone through some crazy life trauma, and I have a different partner who loves Discovery and is excited and passionate about it. And so my experience went from like sitting on one side of the couch completely immersed to sitting next to someone, holding hands when stuff happens, and sharing our excitement. So that was pretty cool. But it's nice to be able to sit down and just watch the episode, as a viewer, take everything in, and then I go and sit down by myself in front of my computer, watch the episode with closed captioning, and take notes for the podcast I'm going to record the next day.
Nice. I have a similar approach. I have to watch each episode 3 times. So I watch the episode at first straight through, then I watch it again with closed captioning. Then I'll usually go read social media or whatever else and see what people are saying, and then I'll go watch it a third time. And then I feel like I'm ready for the ball game to talk about it.
Yep. If I have time we would, the episode would come out Sunday. We record Disco Trek on Monday. So if I had time for a third viewing, I would sit down Monday with my dinner and watch before we recorded the podcast. So, and there were some episodes I think I watched 4 times because they were just so heavy and intense. And Discovery gave us a lot to talk about, and I wanted to make sure that I had all those notes right in front of me.
Let's take a moment and examine Star Trek Discovery, not so much as the show as it is, but as a show that's being released in the world of connected social media, 24/7 media, Twitter, Facebook, and all of that. On one of my previous episodes that as you and I record this hasn't dropped yet, so you wouldn't have heard this conversation, one of the things we were talking about is how each episode was getting so analyzed by fans and put up to such scrutiny. And I'm not even talking about people who were negative about Discovery. I'm talking about, positive people. But each episode was scrutinized to such a degree that, in a way, almost everything was spoiled because it had already been figured out by somebody and there was a theory floating out about there. And that's a new thing for Star Trek, right? Because we've never really had that before. And as someone who's doing a podcast about Discovery in particular and is very active in social media, talk to me about how your experience interacting with the fandom in real time has affected, enhanced, or diminished possibly Discovery for you. I don't want to put words in your mouth. I'll let you make that determination.
All of the above. So when podcasting, though we don't get paid for podcasting, I do consider it a job. So part of my job is to know what's going on, be involved in those fan theories and get the scoop. And there were fan theories that they're fun to discuss. Like I'll give people that. I had some of my own. And so on one hand, I love living in a time where we have the social media where we can basically either watch it together or sit down and have these discussions. Like you can talk with your friends even though they're not in the room. So it's like going to a watching party or a viewing party, but not quite the same thing. I loved the community. I loved engaging with other fans. I had a lot of fun, especially on Twitter, going out and doing polls like, which episode is your favorite? What do you, is Ash Tyler Vogue? Stuff like that. That was very engaging. And I certainly enjoyed the community aspect and being to connect with other fans and go full Star Trek. It was nice in the podcast because, we were able to have those discussions with fans so that everyone got their say, and it gave us a lot to talk about. But probably by the second half of the series, and especially concerning Vogue and Ash Tyler, like I started to ask people, would you have figured this out on your own? If you had or hadn't, would you have preferred to have figured it out on your own, or did you mind kind of learning from other fans, hearing these theories? And there seemed to be a mix of both. But for me, I do sort of wish that I could have taken a step back, because my boyfriend, who was watching Discovery for the first time, and sometimes we watched the episodes for the first time together, and sometimes it would be my third or fourth viewing and his first. And getting to watch all of this unravel, like I didn't talk about fan theories with him at all. We would just sit down, cold turkey, go into the episode, and I would watch these moments be revealed, and like Lorca's from the Mirror Universe, and it blew his mind. And I feel like it just added so much to the impact of the story, and that's something that I missed out on because of what I do and being involved in social media. So while I would like to take a step back for season 2, it's probably not going to be possible just because of what I do. And I love doing Disco Trek. It's so much fun. But at the same time, I do see very positive impacts, and I do see some negative impacts. And I think that at the end of the day, I'm choosing to let the spoilers come, let the fan theories come, because my Discovery experience is so immersive and I enjoy podcasting. And so it's an effect of that. But I would also say that if you can avoid that stuff and want to, certainly try, because I think it makes for a different viewing experience.
So you've been going to STLV fairly regularly. Heather, you've probably seen all the panels and seen all the talent. So why go back?
Why go back? And I have seen all the panels. I have seen the talent, and that is not why I go to STLV. My first STLV, as I said, was 2009. And as of 2018, this will be my 10th consecutive STLV. That first year, I stood back and I watched the other fans interact with each other, and I saw a sense of community there. And I knew immediately that I wanted to be part of that community. I felt like even though I wasn't interacting with those people directly, just by watching them and seeing them getting along and bonding over something that they were obviously very excited about, I felt like that was my tribe. I was like, these are my people. And I want to find a way to be a part of this community. So when I first started going to STLV, I went with my ex-husband. We went by ourselves the first year. And there wasn't a lot of social media then. There was, well, let me take that back. That doesn't sound right. There was not a lot of like the unofficial Star Trek Las Vegas convention group that I run. That was not a very active thing at that time, and it may not even have existed yet. The Creations official group was on Facebook. There was another website that I can't think of the name of it that was for Trek fans. So I kind of reached out and started to get to know a few people then. Met them at the convention. Okay, everyone was friendly. It was a nice community. Went back the second year with friends of ours, had a different experience, not totally immersed in the convention all the time. And then comes 2011 and I'm getting divorced. So basically a month before the convention, I find out that I am going to be going alone. And at that time I was in the unofficial group. I was not a moderator or admin there. And I just reached out and said, A, I have an extra ticket. B, I need some friends. And the response to that was great. I had a lot of people reach out, and one of my girlfriends offered to let me share her room. So that was my first year getting to go alone and dive into the community, shall I say. Every year, I make more and more friends. The experience gets better and better. I like to tell people when they go to this convention, you're not alone. Even though you're going by yourself, maybe, you have kindred spirits there. But at the same time, I think that it does take a couple years to really find your place. And it wasn't until 2014, 13 that I went by myself, was standing in line at the registration for the hotel room, overheard a conversation behind me, inserted myself in it politely, and I met my best friend, Claire. And by the time we got up to check in, I was like, hey, I'm here alone. She was there alone. Do you want to get rooms next to each other so that we can hang out? And we've now been roommates for like the past 3 or 4 years. So that happened. The next year, it's just more and more friends. And so I have built this Star Trek family. And then I somehow got promoted to helping run the unofficial STLV group. The person who created that, her name is Sarah. She wasn't going to be attending the convention, so she stepped back and asked me and someone else to run it. That person eventually kind of stepped away too, so it was up to me. And I've been lucky enough to really get to shape that community and create a positive space for attendees and fans that is super duper helpful for everybody. I met Jeff in 2015. Then I got involved in podcasting. We met a few years ago, John.
Yep, that's right.
It's really about making friends, finding family, and I guess that's really the core. And I'm taking a very long time to get around to saying that I have truly found a new family among the people at STLV. And for me, that's something important because I have been on my own in Colorado for 10 years, truly away from my actual blood family for 12 years. I don't get to see my family a lot. And so because of that, I've grown apart from my biological family quite a bit. And in turn, I have been blessed with a giant community of people who give back so much to me. They support me in my podcasting endeavors, and they supported me when I had to leave my house due to threat of domestic violence. It's because of the Star Trek community that got me out of there. And so that's why I keep going back. They are phenomenal, wonderful people that are my family, and it grows every year.
Well, I think we'll talk more about that a little bit later, but I want to ask you a follow-up on conventions. So I think I understand about STLV, but my question is, have you been to any other conventions recently since you've started this whole Star Trek journey, and how was that experience for you?
So the last convention that I attended was Denver Comic-Con. That was, I think, through 2 or 3 years ago now. And unfortunately, it's so big that it is entirely too overwhelming for me. It also coincides with Pride Weekend here in Denver. So going downtown when you've got oh gosh, Denver Comic Con has had something close to like 300,000 people go through it in the 3 days that it's held.
Wow.
So you've got this massive amount of people on top of Pride Parade and the LGBT community coming down. And there are people, Colorado, Denver's the center of Colorado, and Denver's also sort of a center of the western states out here. There's not a lot that goes on. We get a lot of people coming down from Utah, up from Arizona, over from Kansas. And so it's just a massive number of people. And it seems like the older I get, the more social anxiety and really just anxiety over amounts of people being around, that I don't tend to enjoy these conventions that are super large. So like I will never go to San Diego Comic-Con because of how massive it is. It just seems completely overwhelming. I go to STLV because that's where my family is, and I love that it's Star Trek only. There is a smaller convention here in Denver called Starfest, which I wanted to go to this year, and I didn't make it. I had some stuff going on. I think it will be better for me because it's smaller. But again, I've seen the guests that are there. Although they did have Mary Chieffo this year, and I was super bummed that I didn't get to go spend some time with her because small conventions are great for better one-on-one time. But generally, I've seen the guests that are there or they're going to be at STLV, and I don't have that family there. So I'm just not as driven to go since my people aren't there.
This next question I want to ask you, I feel like I already know the answer. It seems like that you're primarily a Star Trek collector, but it's really you collect Star Trek friends. Do you collect any Star Trek things?
I've heard you ask other guests that question, and yes, you're correct. That would be my answer, is that I collect Star Trek friends. I do collect Star Trek things. I have a small shelf of various things, including a Mek'leth replica, a Saurian brandy bottle replica, Picard's desk crystal, roddenberry.com. It's really little things like we do our craft swap at STLV. And so everybody brings a craft and we just swap them back and forth. So I've got a lot of little things from that. And I'd say, aside from the Star Trek art I do collect tribbles. I bring home a tribble from every STLV. So it would be accurate to say that I have 9 tribbles, but I think I have more than 9 tribbles.
It's all right. We don't need to talk about your scary tribble collector syndrome. It's okay.
They keep multiplying.
Just keep them away from the Quattro Triticale. So the question, though, is if you collect these things, for what purpose do you collect them? Is it to display them to other people? Is it for yourself, or is there some other purpose?
It is solely for myself. I left out that I also collect pins, and that's probably my largest focused collection. Side note, I have always been a collector of things. I don't know what it is. Maybe being raised a poor kid that didn't have a lot of things, I like stuff. So I collect many, many pins. I have quite a lot of Fansets pins. And then the network has been kind of giving out various pins too for the things we do. So they're all for me. And, I love them all. They're just special little mementos or tokens. Most of them are coming from STLV. I love to support Fansets. They're great guys, and they are so generous with the Star Trek community. So it's really just for me and just to have Star Trek in my daily life and to look around and say, oh, I have a great memory about where I bought that thing.
Oh, wonderful. Do you dress up at all? Costumes, uniforms, cosplay?
Yes. So I do. By trade, my day job, I own a pet care company, and I am typically wearing a Star Trek shirt and or a Star Trek hat. So I have a lot of regular day clothes. I don't do as much cosplay as I used to. I think Part of it is I just like being really comfortable at STLV these days. My STLV life has gotten much busier now that I'm a podcaster and run a Facebook group. So I have an Anovos red dress. I used to have an Into Darkness dress that I sold to a friend. And I'm a member of Cheerfleet. So that's one thing that I am doing today, and that I am doing this year. We've had... Every year we get more and more members joining Cheerfleet, and I sat out a couple years because by the time we get organized, do our cheers, walk around the convention space, it's, 3 or 4 hours of that, and it's exhausting. But it's something that I really enjoy. I think it was a cute idea that my friend Damien Ann had along with Laura years ago, and I'm glad to see it surviving and flourishing, despite the fact that Damien doesn't make it every year anymore. It's nice to still keep it going. So I've got that, but then I have a couple corset dresses that I bought in the vendor's room at STLV that are super fun. So
Nice.
I like dressing up, and I will cosplay every now and then, but not at the rate that I used to. I do love the cosplay at STLV and other conventions. I'll flip through albums and check people out. I'm not a seamstress. I'm terrible with sewing. I have claimed on previous podcasts that I was going to learn to sew, and that never happened. So, meh.
Okay, fair enough. Well, then I want to go a little bit deeper on just a couple things before we turn to talking about maybe some episodes. But considering all the conventions that you've been to and considering all the Star Trek that you've watched, so this is a very broad question here that encompasses all of that. What is your very first Star Trek memory, if you can possibly recall it?
It's that terrible time that I watched Voyager and it wasn't very good. Like that, and I wish I knew what episode it was. It's funny because when I started, diving into these series, once I had watched everyone for the first time, Voyager was my favorite. Voyager, number one, the theme for Voyager is still my favorite. It's Discovery's very close and I need to spend some time, but Voyager had such wonderful, strong women characters and some really fun stories, and I loved it. Now it's my least favorite. Well, that or Enterprise. It's hard to tell. But I wish I had given it more of a chance so that my first Star Trek memory wasn't a negative one. Since then, I have built a plethora of very positive Star Trek memories.
That's okay.
So it hurts my heart to say that was my first memory. I wish that it wasn't. Sadly, it is, but I hope that it serves as a testimony that you can have, you can be introduced to Star Trek in a negative way and turn into somebody like me.
That's okay. Well, then let's talk about something positive then. So again, in the same context, right? All the times that you've watched Star Trek, all the events that you've attended with Star Trek, all your Star Trek friends, what is your single best memory of Star Trek? The single moment, your best moment of Star Trek?
I can already tell you, if I talk about it, I'm going to cry. It was meeting Leonard Nimoy. I met him in 2009. He was there. He was on stage with...
Is this at STLV?
Yeah, it was at STLV 2009, so my very first one. And he had been up on stage with Zachary Quinto and Jacob Kogan, who played young Spock in the 2009 film. And then I think Shatner popped up on stage with him. But when we went to do the photo op, and I was with my ex-husband, and my ex-husband was in front of me and walked up and extended his hand to shake it and said, "It's a pleasure to meet you, sir." And Mr. Nimoy said, "No, it's a pleasure to meet you." And, he didn't say this to me. I came up and I think I shook his hand too and smiled. And I don't even know if I said anything, but just witnessing him return a greeting like that with saying, "No, it's a pleasure to meet you. It's a pleasure to meet the fans," was just a phenomenal, wonderful thing to experience. They say never meet your heroes, and I strongly disagree with that. I got to meet Leonard Nimoy for 5 seconds and took a picture. I don't even like the picture anymore because I call it me from a past life. I don't even look like myself. And I look unhappy because at that point in my life, I was unhappy. But that moment was extremely impacting in my life. And, to this day, I'm having a hard time talking about it because I'm emotional. And that should tell you how powerful it was.
Now, it sounds like a beautiful memory, Heather, and it sounds like you had a great experience with just a fabulous person that I think all of us as Star Trek fans were blessed to have part of the show, right? Because,
Yes.
Outside of the work that he did on screen, which was wonderful, he was such a wonderful person that he was great to have around. There's been some talent, which, you can take it or leave it, right? And we can get into that later if you want. But I think he was certainly someone who was always delightful. And actually, one of the very first Star Trek conventions that I ever went to, I want to say was in the late 80s in Manhattan it wasn't the Statler. It was the hotel that used to be the Statler. And it was a creation convention, actually. I'm pretty sure of that. And Leonard was there, and he was really big into poetry at the time. And he was doing poetry readings as part of his bit on stage. And it was just such a delight and a treat. So I certainly understand what a great experience it must have been for you.
He has some amazing poetry, and I just have to tell everyone, if you have not read his poetry, go Google. Google's your friend. Find it. There's some really beautiful stuff. Leonard was just a phenomenal human being. Yeah, I could do a whole podcast about Leonard Nimoy. So,
all right, then. Well, maybe we'll do that sometime. Since there might be a podcast network that we're all involved with, that does shows. I don't know. Maybe we can talk about that at a staff meeting at some point in the future, as in like 2.5 hours from now. Wow, that was really meta. Okay, let's move on along then. Let's move along home. Oh God, I can't believe I said that. I'm gonna leave that in.
Shap 3.
No, we're going right back to the first Shap. Okay. Because my wife tells me I'm basically a kid anyway. Okay, Heather, so let's talk about some episodes. So I dispatched the M5 to search the internet and to do some gentle internet sleuthing, and it's prepared a list for me of what it thinks you think are some of the best episodes of Star Trek. And so let's take a look at this list here, and let's start with perhaps City on the Edge of Forever. Why do you feel that this is one of the best episodes of Star Trek?
Edith Keeler. Yes, Edith Keeler. That is my truest answer. Aside from anything that can be said as this episode as a whole, and I have to shout out to the recently passed Harlan Ellison, who, if you haven't picked up the graphic novel that has pretty much the original story that he wrote, you certainly should, because it's different. It's great. I loved it. As most Trekkies know, what we got on television was not the same story that Harlan Ellison wrote, but his presence is very much still in the episode. Edith Keeler's optimism is so Star Trek, and even though she's in one episode for a brief amount of time, I want to be her. She gives me something and someone to look up to. The quote that she has when she's talking to the men in the soup kitchen, and she's saying, "One day soon, man is going to be able to harness incredible energies, maybe even the atom, energies that could ultimately hurl us into other worlds and some sort of spaceship, etc., etc., etc. They will be able to find a way to give each man hope and a common future, and those are the days worth living for." She's just such a beacon of hope and optimism and having something to look forward to and living for something. This quote was shared by my friend Thad a couple weeks ago when Anthony Bourdain committed suicide, and that news came out just following Kate Spade's suicide. And so poignant and evergreen, really. And we need more Edith Keelers in the world, basically.
So I want to come back to that in a second. I just want to take a moment and underscore the fact that the original script anyway, from Harlan Ellison was so very, very, very different from what we ended up seeing on screen. And which I think is only natural, because if you look at how the thing was written, I mean, he wrote that script before the show had even aired. So, as we sit here in 2018, we know what Star Trek is, and we know sort of what all the different series were like. But he was really writing with nothing but some guidance from Roddenberry and a writer's Bible that might have had some stuff in it, but certainly didn't have the fully fleshed out version that we have today. So it was very clear, though, reading that original script, how wildly different it was. With the jewels of sound and Beckwith, and they were going to execute him, and it's really something else to take a look at it for sure. So I would encourage anyone to do that. And in fact, I just want to add, one of the things I did at STLV many years ago, I can't remember how long ago this was, but he actually, or not himself, but Harlan's people had a booth there, and they were selling the original audio drama. And you could buy it, and you got it on a USB stick with copies of the script and interpretations and a lot of bonus material. And you can hear it from the man in his own words, what his experience was writing the script. And he certainly has his own take on it for sure.
Shameless plug. We interviewed Skyboat Media for Shore Leave that year. And so if you go back and find the episode, you can hear that interview. And part of it was that we got to preview that audiobook. And yes, Harlan spoke his mind, and he certainly had words to say about his experience in writing it. And I think it's worth listening to. I think that, Harlan was very, he was offensive to a lot of people. And there's always multiple sides to a story, but I'm glad that he got to tell his story, and I think it's worth listening to.
I completely agree with you. So let me challenge you, though, on one part of this, Heather, because that's something that I always like to do, is to put some provocations to the guests about these episodes. How shall we go about this? One of the most fundamental ideas of Star Trek is that it's about exploring the universe. This episode isn't about exploring anything. They're not going out there. They're not boldly going. They're, in fact, trying to correct a mistake or prevent a mistake in history. There's not any aliens. There's not really any spaceships. It's not about exploration or any of those things that people generally ascribe to Star Trek. So how could it be one of the best episodes?
Well, I do consider the Guardian an alien, even though, I guess definitions may vary, but to me, that is an alien presence there. And to me, this episode is exploring humanity and the potential of what could happen. I don't know. I'm not one that really cares to debate. Not to spoil your question. I think that it's got the basic elements of being a Star Trek episode, having the Guardian, having some time travel, which, isn't in every Star Trek episode, but is in some. And to me, that's the boldly going, is that you're going through time. But to me, what makes a great Star Trek, again, is Edith Keeler. And to me, it's another great opportunity for Kirk. That's a whole another rabbit hole to go through, is Kirk and his women of the week. Is Kirk a womanizer? Is he not? I would say that he's actually not. Even though we have this, short episode, this one-off episode with Edith Keeler, I feel that relationship was a very powerful one for him. I would have liked to have seen him wrestle with it more, or for it to have had an effect on him in other episodes. But to me, that hope and optimism that is so much a part of Roddenberry is in this episode. Yeah, that's all I have to say. I don't have a good way to defend it other than that.
No, I think that's exactly right, though, Heather. And that's why I put the questions, right? It's not because we're in a debate club or I'm just trying to beat you up. But no, I'm serious. I'm being genuine here. Is that I think that's the answer for you, is that it's about Edith Keeler's point of view and about her optimism, and that makes it a good Star Trek episode for you. And that's okay. That's fine. There's not some panel of arbiters here that's holding up signs, 7.5, 3.0. It doesn't matter, right? We don't do that here on Trek Profiles. It's about what the guest believes. And the way that we find out what the guest believes is by asking the questions. So let me just say one more thing about City on the Edge. And it's just the fact that I want to agree with you that I think the biggest tragedy of the whole episode is unavoidable. And I'm not talking about Edith Keeler's death. I'm talking about the fact that when they were making television in the 60s, they didn't really do serialization. And I think that an episode like this would have been profoundly better had it been done in an era where they had allowed that and we got to see the person wrestling with the aftermath of it. And I agree, that's probably the saddest thing about the episode. And I wish we could have seen more of that. But alas, it wasn't to be. But let's talk about something that is a little bit more in the modern era. And this episode has come up a lot on Trek Profiles. So The Visitor, tell me about that one.
Oh man, The Visitor. Sorry. Just thinking about this episode leaves me kind of speechless. I cannot watch this episode without crying. And I think that the biggest part for me, well, okay, there are two things. DS9, despite being so much, and I will say this, and you're probably going to ask me this question, but I'm totally going to spoil it. I think DS9 is the best Star Trek series. That doesn't mean it's my favorite, just that it's the best.
Well, what's your definition of best?
I think that, well, how do I say? It is the most profound and influential series for me.
Heather, one of the interesting things about The Visitor is that most of the major cast in the series regulars aren't really in it. I mean, Sisko's in it, but he's in it for all of maybe 5 minutes of screen time throughout the whole episode. So it doesn't take place on a spaceship, doesn't take place out in space, it takes place in Earth. It's very much an episode in its configuration that's really very different from not just Deep Space Nine, but really all of Star Trek and a lot of science fiction, I would say. But yet you put it up as one of the best episodes. So let's start there.
Yes. This episode, so there are a few different reasons why it works for me, and I will do my best to explain them because I haven't really sat down and formulated why it works so well for me. DS9, you make a great point that this episode does not have a lot of the major characters in it, and it does have Sisko in it for a short amount of time, but the story really is about Jake and his relationship with his father. DS9 is so special because while it is a story about many things, it is very largely a story about Ben and Jake Sisko. And it's really one of the only times in Star Trek that we see an admirable, healthy relationship between a parent and a child. Can I get deep? I might get deep.
You're allowed.
I came from a home where my father left before I was even born. So I didn't have a father for many years. And when my mom met my stepfather, I struggled indefinitely. I was 4 when they met, and I didn't really I had other male figures in my life, very close to my grandfather, and sometimes I would call my uncle daddy. So I was a broken child in that way, that I didn't understand what a relationship with a father would be like. And I struggled with my own father, and I think he struggled with me because I don't think he knew what to do with this little crazy 4-year-old. Now my father and my stepdad is my dad. Case closed. I don't have a relationship with my biological father, even though I do know him. I wound up having to cut him out of my life because every time he was in it, it hurt me. My stepfather, who is my daddy, is an amazing person. And so when I see what Jake goes through in this episode, it plays my heartstrings. I get it. And I can even step into Sisko's shoes when he sees Jake and understand that side of the relationship. I struggle. I identify with Jake as he goes through life, and he's, his marriage fails. He doesn't have children. I don't have children. I've had marriage and relationships fail. I identify with that a lot. And I think that there's also something to be said, and I'm just moving on to a different tangent, so I apologize. This happens when I get emotional and passionate about something, but
it's okay, Heather. The show is about the guest, so you're allowed. Where do you want to go?
So I do want to talk about Melanie, but I want to talk about Jake first. I think that another reason DS9 is so special is that we got to watch Jake grow up. And so this episode, you're seeing Jake as a grown man, and it's not something that we would have ever seen except for this episode. And that to me was just very, very powerful. And I don't know specifically why, aside from what I've said about his relationship with his father and how it explored what might happen in time. But I found that just very, very moving and very, very powerful, and an amazing story to be told. And then from a different perspective, I love the character of Melanie, and I love that this story is being told to her because I love hearing people's stories. And I think the episode was so smartly done in that way. We don't get a lot from Melanie, but I could be Melanie. I could be that woman, wanting to write this book and hear this story and know why Jake never wrote his book or never finished his book, why he stopped writing. It was just so amazingly well done. And it's super cool that she's Andrew Robinson's daughter.
I think, and I had a lengthy discussion on some previous episodes about this episode. So if people want to hear what I have to say about it, they can go back and listen to that. But one of the things that I thought was interesting is that I don't think Jake ever actually becomes a fully grown man in this episode. I mean, biologically he does. But in a way, his life he's stuck in amber at 18 years old, right? I mean, he gives up his writing. He gives up his marriage. He gives up through neglect, right? Which is pretty well explicitly stated in the episode. So it's very much about a guy who can't move forward and he can't move backward, and he's just floundering around. And it's essentially a story where a child commits suicide at the end. It's very heavy stuff. It
is, and I love when Star Trek does this. Like you said earlier with City on the Edge, it's a very different episode than what we get from the rest of Star Trek, and I don't know. I tend to be a very different person than a lot of other people or something. I really love when we take on these deep issues, and really just the acting, the writing, the way the story is done obviously is impacting for more than just me. And so anyone who hasn't seen it, go watch it and grab some tissues.
Let's jump to TOS and talk about Devil in the Dark.
Oh.
The Horda.
The Horda.
No kill eye.
No kill eye. Well, as I mentioned earlier, I own a pet care business. My passion in life besides Star Trek is certainly animals. And Devil in the Dark is just such a beautiful story. Number one, about how important it is to not be afraid of what you don't understand. And that, again, is an evergreen lesson. This episode can be shown to people today and forever on because of the wonderful moral that it teaches us. But I love that the Horta turns out to be a mother, and she's just protecting her babies. And this episode for me, like in TOS, and it's hard for me to pick favorite characters anymore. Spock is certainly up there, and this was the first time that we got to see the mind meld. And I did a podcast recently on another network where we talked about this episode, and so I watched it 3 or 4 times. And to be honest, sometimes it's a little slow, but the entire scene where Spock is mind melding with the Horta, I have so much admiration for the amazing acting that Leonard Nimoy did. Like, I like to step away from the episode, and whereas in the past that would be bad for me because I'd be overly critical of it, like I was that first time I saw Voyager.
Right.
I like doing it now because it gives me the opportunity to really appreciate the talent that these actors bring to the show. And it's just such a cool episode. It was, it's on a planet. There's beautiful matte paintings. I love that the eggs are these giant ball thing. And, it's a lot of fun visually. Even though it's nothing extravagant, it's still just a really neat episode. And the story is one that it will be important forever.
I have two very small things about the episode that I always remember or remembered about whenever I watch it, which is that the story goes that Gene Coon wrote the episode because the actor that had the actor that was underneath the Horta created the Horta, and then Gene Coon wrote the episode when he saw how he brought the Horta costume in, and he's like, look at this cool thing I made. And he's like, I'm going to write an episode about that. And so that's how the episode was written, which I thought was just amazingly cool. And second, my favorite little trivia about this episode for all the fans out there, it's the first time Dr. McCoy ever says, I'm a doctor, not a insert name of thing here. So my two favorite little things about that episode that just make it warm my heart every time I see it. Yeah.
I love it. That line, I'm a doctor, not a... it's going to live forever. There was just that reference, not that exact line, but I think I'm a doctor, not a telemarketer was in Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom. This is one of my favorite things is when Star Trek references pop into places that you least expect it. Because, once you're so involved in fandom and you know Star Trek well enough to catch these things, they're everywhere. And it makes me so extremely happy to know how much Star Trek has permeated modern culture.
As I was doing my prep for this episode, and I do a fair bit of prep, I research all the episodes. I rewatch them all if I hadn't seen them recently. And one of the weirdest little tidbits I came across is that we just talked about City on the Edge of Forever. There was a South Park episode called City on the Edge of Forever. So there you go.
Oh, no.
Yeah, which is just amazing to me how this stuff is all over the place. You can give or take South Park. It doesn't matter. But it just amazes me how Star Trek has permeated all corners of pop culture. I think you're completely right about that. So let's compare your selection of Edith Keeler, a role model of someone who is optimistic, someone that you say you want to be, to a character like Ben Sisko, because also on the list is In the Pale Moonlight. So I have this vision of Edith Keeler, this optimistic, hopeful, positive person. But then we also have the Ben Sisko in the Pale Moonlight. So tell me why that episode is on the list.
One of the reasons that I do really love this episode and that I love DS9 is that it is very much the opposite of TOS, but especially TNG, where we are all perfect. I don't truly identify with any of the characters in the series where we have reached a future where everyone is picture perfect. And I think we are all human. We all have varying sides of our personalities. We get angry. We do lie. I'd love to meet a person who's never told a lie. They might be out there. But Sisko in this episode is a real person. And it's part of why I love DS9 is that you have characters that make sacrifices and do things that they know are wrong, which they think it's for the better good. And Sisko does this many times, not just in this episode, but throughout DS9, he makes some, what people would say, questionable choices, risky decisions, which I think ultimately, he truly believes are in the best interest of the crew, everyone on the station and the Federation. But to me, it is important that, yes, I admire and enjoy who we are supposed to be in the future, but that's who we are not right now. We're not those characters. And because I'm not that person, I can't see myself there. So DS9 and Star Trek Discovery, which I'm sure we'll talk about later, are so similar in that they are telling a story of real people, and real people face challenges, and real people do things that they may regret later. And I think that's important to have in Star Trek.
You bring up something that profoundly touches a chord for me, because I was having this discussion with someone just a couple weeks ago, which is that the Federation that I see in especially TNG And I will say in Deep Space Nine, too, I mean, I think the characters, you're right, are a little bit of a standard deviation away from what we have seen in TNG. But the Federation does not seem like a society where I would personally wish to live.
Mm.
And that's not to say it doesn't have some good things about it. It does. And some things that we don't have today, which are desirable. But I see a society that is totalitarian.
Mm-hmm.
It's a monoculture. And I don't see a dynamism and a human flourishing and a diversity of thought and a different ways of being. And this was brought on by the fact that I was reading a book. Actually, now I'm going to go really far afield, so stay with me, Heather. I'll come back to Star Trek here in a minute. But I was reading a book that was a history book talking about the Soviet occupation of Eastern Europe. And the book was specifically about when the Soviets would take over new countries, what they would do. And their main goal within the first 90 days to 6 months was to destroy civil society in that country. And civil society is that broad midband of things between the family and the government. So if there was a chess club, you were not allowed to have a chess club unless the state ran it. So chess clubs had to be destroyed. Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, destroyed. The local gardening society in the neighborhood had to be destroyed, because everything had to be sponsored by and for the state, and there could be nothing outside the state. As I look at the Federation, I don't see anything outside the Federation or Starfleet. There's nothing else. There is no civil society. And, you know, and I understand that it's a TV show. I understand the limitations of that. But there's no pop culture. Where's the Johnny Rotten of the Federation who's putting his middle finger up at everything, right? In sort of a gleeful sort of way. You know, I want more dynamism. And I think that you're touching on something here, and you're talking about Deep Space Nine that's very profound, right? Is that we want to have versions of ourselves that are better, but not too much better.
I think the closest thing we get to seeing that is the Maquis, because I was thinking about Eddington a little bit there, but we don't. And I've heard this come up in conversations around Star Trek before, but you're right, we don't see society and how society lives. We're only seeing, for the most part, what's happening on Federation starships, on DS9, and then on various alien planets that we go to and represent the Federation and act on their behalf. We very rarely see what is truly happening, like back on Earth, like outside of Starfleet headquarters. And personally, I would love to see a series where we got to see what that world was like and see what modern culture was, if it even exists. I think that would make a unique opportunity to really embellish the utopian world that is the Star Trek world. I don't personally, I strive every day. Like for me, we talk about, oh, well, Star Trek, the world they live in is the future. We'll get there someday. Well, I'm not going to live in that someday. I'm living now. So what I do, and again, tangent here, what I do is at least try to emulate the type of people that we see in Star Trek, and, people who are positive and accepting of diversity, who do their best to cultivate community, compassion, empathy, and have a successful society. I think that we could do that now as human beings. But you're right. We don't really know what happens outside of the Federation and starships. So aside from the various few hobbies that we get, and I guess in Enterprise, they watched movies and water polo and stuff like that. But I would love to see something like that. And in the meantime, if that's not there, I agree with you. I wouldn't want to live in that utopia, in that vision. I want to live where I'm living now, where we're allowed to be individuals and express ourselves and have hobbies and have chess clubs.
I might be stepping on a grenade here, but Heather, is it possible that Takuvma was right at the beginning of the Vulcan Hello when he's talking about how the Federation is going to take over and corrupt the Klingon Empire?
What do you think? I understand how people could see how maybe the Federation attempts to assimilate. It's hard because I have a hard time answering this question from your perspective because I just don't see it the same way. I don't see where the Federation necessarily washes away any identity. I feel that Spock is still a Vulcan. I feel that Worf is still Klingon. I mean, maybe, well, and I don't know that Worf could really even be an example because Worf was raised with human parents. So it's not like he was necessarily assimilated into some kind of Federation culture that way.
Well, it's funny you just say that because I want to stay with that for just a second because I just finished the Deep Space Nine episode where his brother comes and basically calls him on all of that. And says, you're not, you've lost your Klingonness, right? Can you at least do this thing for me and put me to death, right? And give me an honorable death, And he's like, you're living in this, comfortable human style quarters and all this kind of stuff. So it was just interesting to me. But my take on Worf is always that he wants to be more Klingon than the Klingons because they're not, he thinks in his own head that he's got to be Kahless. Right? And anything less than that is unacceptable. Meanwhile, we see regular Klingons who are not like Worf.
Well, and I think that's largely because, there is maybe a guilt and just a very strong need for him to embrace a heritage that he didn't get to grow up in. And I understand that. I mean, it's almost a desperation, really. Here I am at 37, only recently in the last 10 years, really, truly identifying with and understanding that I am a part of the LGBTQ community. And so it's really important for me to be a part of that community and integrated into that community and to be a voice for that community and to say the right things. I know that I've never been homophobic in any way, but I know that I was raised and like my grandparents, they've said spiteful things. Rest in peace, grandmother. They've said things against the community. And even when I came out to my mom, I told my mom, and then I said, if you want to tell my dad, tell him. And she wouldn't. And I was just like, he's my dad. He loves me. What does he care? Like, why? I can't even fathom. Like, I feel like if I told my dad, he wouldn't have a negative reaction, but still here was my mother saying she's not going to tell my dad. And I was like, well, I hope he stays off Facebook because he's going to find out that way. But it's a part of having not been a community that you feel like you should have been. And so you really want to be a part of it. And that's just a community for me, not my blood heritage. I could reach out and say that, I have a very great and deep respect for my Native American roots. But despite knowing that my Native American, she was Cherokee, my great-great-great-grandmother was not forced into marriage or anything like that. I understand that as a white person, it's not necessarily my place to talk about that part of my heritage. And I've even made a snafu several years ago. We had a cosplay idea to be the Miramani's tribe from Paradise Syndrome. Was that episode?
I think that's right. Yeah, I think that's right.
I thought it would be okay to just represent some characters that were in Star Trek. But, it seems like most people agree that Star Trek probably shouldn't have done that episode showing Native American peoples in a very stereotypical way. And while I wouldn't dress up as any kind of Native person for a Halloween party, it still was not appropriate to do that for a Star Trek convention. And I struggle because I deeply appreciate that part of my heritage. And I have taken time to understand my ancestors and that culture and explore the connections there. And, I want to be a part of that community. And that's something that's never going to be possible for me. But I certainly understand why Worf is so desperate to be so Klingon and embrace that side of his heritage. I think when it comes back to Kuvma and the Federation, I don't feel that the Federation really suppresses cultural identity in any way. I certainly don't think it's their goal to take any part of a Starfleet member or Federation member's culture away. But maybe I will say that it's similar to like the Facebook group I run, where there are certain rules when you sign up. And so there's, code of conduct, how you should treat other people, what you should say. And when it comes down to what you should say, the rules for my group are just don't be a jerk, don't harass, bully, insult other people. When you sign up for something, you are signing up to play by those rules. And it seems like sometimes people believe that is a form of censorship, restriction, oppression. So I think that's the closest metaphor I can make. And unfortunately, when cultures are assimilated into the Federation, it's not apparently always the people of that culture who are making the decision, but the higher ups. And so from that, I can see where it comes from. But to me, Takuma, his Klingons were very much a metaphor for the current political state and a pretty basic statement of what a certain people or party fears as far as their rights and identity being taken away. And that's something for Politrex to take on.
Fair enough.
You can take this part out if you want to.
No, it's okay. I think that when these things come up, I think it's important to talk about. And I think that if we touch on something that's relevant, we can talk about it. It's okay. I think people just have to realize, though, that part of what I do on the show is I challenge the guests. And so I have lots of my own ideas and lots of my own thoughts about things, which may or may not have any reflection on the questions I ask, because I feel it's important to explore this stuff, right? I mean, it's one thing to come on a show like this and, we can talk about episodes and geek out for an hour or two, but it's another thing to really get to the heart of what does this stuff actually mean? And we can only interpret that by interrogating our thoughts and feelings about the episode. And I think it's a mark of a good show, a good Star Trek episode, that you can look at it and you can have many interpretations of it. And you can go lots of different ways with how you interpret it. I think that's a good thing because, for instance, you talked about, that having a world of diversity is important. I'd agree with you. And on top of it, I love the idea that there's diverse opinions about different things that happen in Star Trek land. I think that's also a good thing and a sign of dynamism in the fandom, which I support.
Yes, I think, and just to follow that up, I think that is why Star Trek survives. And people, it's what other show is like this? What other show has such a long-standing ability to be relevant and thought-provoking than Star Trek? I can't think of any other.
I'm right there with you. Here we are doing a Star Trek podcast, right? And this is what, 2018 as we record this. The show started in 1966 and we're still talking about it. So I think that's a good sign, right? So,
absolutely.
Okay, let's talk about, we've talked about some of the best episodes and I just want to be conscious of where we are in time. So let's talk about the episodes that are most meaningful to you. And so maybe we can take a look at this list, and it seems like it has a little bit of an overlap with the previous list. Is there anything else you want to say about City on the Edge that hasn't been said already?
Nope. I really said everything I needed to say there. I just think that the world needs more Edith Keelers.
I'd agree with you. Totally beautiful person, and the kind of optimism that I think is in short supply these days. Okay, let's talk about then some Discovery episodes. Into the Forest I Go. Tell me why this is one of the most meaningful of episodes of Star Trek for you, above all 700 and something other hours.
Let me tell you why. And I just talked about this. We recorded Disco Trek last night, and Disco Trek's episode was focused on Lieutenant Paul Stamets. And Into the Forest I Go is where we have our first kiss between Stamets and his partner, Dr. Culber. And I will tell you why this is so important to me. I will tell you from personally for me, and then I will tell you another reason that came from our guest last night. So most people that know me, and if you don't know me now, you get to know that I'm a queer person. I identify as pansexual and or bisexual, depending on what your definition is. I leave it as pansexual because I'm attracted to people regardless of their sexual orientation or gender. So you can be you can have no gender identity. Some people don't. I may still be attracted to that person. For some people, pansexual is the same thing as bisexual. So whatever. However, I just identify as queer because that's just who I am. It took a very long time for me to understand who I was in that way and to understand my sexuality. And it's really happened as I've become more involved in the Star Trek community. One of my very close friends who is very similar to me. Side note, I'm also a polyamorous person, which means that I just love multiple people romantically at the same time. And just to preface this as well, yes, I am a polyamorous pansexual woman in a monogamous heterosexual relationship. So even then, I have my own issues with fitting in to the queer community because unfortunately, a lot of people will say, oh, I'm not gay enough, or, stuff like that. And that's, again, a whole other podcast. But it's taken a long time for me to truly understand my sexuality and to feel like I have a place in the LGBTQ community. Once I became a podcaster specifically, I started talking about who I am because I feel that since I have an avenue to use my voice, I'm going to do that. I'm speaking for myself, but I'm also speaking for a community. And I don't care whether people feel I'm a part of their community or not. I know that I am, and I know that I fit in there. So Star Trek, and I just talked about this, and I talked about it before. So if you've listened to me talk about it before, I'm sorry. But Star Trek has a history with queer episodes where they try to break the glass ceiling, but they just wind up tapping it. And so let's talk about Rejoined from DS9, where Jadzia meets Jadzia meets Lenara Khan, who in a previous life, the Trills hosts were a heterosexual.
The symbionts, yeah.
Yes, symbionts, sorry. The symbionts were in what essentially
they were married.
Yes, and they were a heterosexual couple. And although in the episode we have, two women kiss, which got lauded as, oh, it's a lesbian kiss, And that was a very powerful, groundbreaking thing to have on television at the time. A lot of people in the queer community feel that it didn't go all the way because it got explained away by previously being a heterosexual relationship. And I get that. And I understand that disappointment there and feeling that the lesbian relationship kind of gets tossed to the side because it's explained away as having previously been heterosexual.
I have to interject to say, even in the famous TOS episode, Plato's Stepchildren, where you have the Kirk and Uhura kiss, first interracial kiss on television, attributed by many, that the reason that it was allowed by NBC and by the censors is that because in the context of the episode, they were being forced to kiss. They didn't actually want to kiss. So it was explained away in that venue as well.
Right. So I like to point this stuff out so that people understand why, minority communities and that includes the LGBT community, don't laud these episodes, don't celebrate these episodes as being, oh, it's a lesbian kiss, because stuff like this happens. And so there's that aspect. Now, I do have to do an aside here and say that in talking to other men and women, and non-binary people in the queer community. That episode, Rejoined, was still very empowering and special, because regardless of how it may have been explained away, it was still something like that was accepted by the rest of the crew. But essentially, it's being able to see these two women in love with each other and share that kiss without any kind of pushback or offense from the crew. And this is something that I just love about Jadzia as well, because this is an experience that happens around Jadzia where people are like, oh, hey, this is totally natural and cool. There's nothing wrong with it. But Jadzia herself, in Rules of Acquisition, where it has Pell, the female Ferengi, who is parading as a male Ferengi and being a business partner to Quark, and then Pell falls in love with Quark, and Dax notices this and believing that Pell is a man says, oh, well, you're in love with Quark. And there's no question or criticism from Dax. Like, this is just totally normal and natural. And so while I didn't understand, for me, and sorry, I know we're talking about Discovery. I'll get there.
It's okay.
While I didn't understand when I saw that episode that I was pansexual, I still, like, now I see that, Dax is very much a pansexual character, even to the point that Terry Farrell said that at one of the previous STLVs, that, that's how she would define Jadzia's sexuality. And so that's a big reason, one of the many reasons that Jadzia is my favorite character. But back to Discovery.
Well, let me ask you, I want to ask you,
yes.
I want to ask you one question about that before we move on. Wouldn't you think that any Trill that had been joined through 7 or 8 or 10 or 20 or 30 lifetimes would also fall in the same category? Or do you think that she was unique in that regard?
No, I mean, I think it would only be natural. But I probably need more time to think on that, because it's not something that I've really delved into before. I would say that there may be,
It's okay. It was just a hypothetical, and
yeah.
The one thing I will say about that episode is that Trill society seems to have not equipped people with the correct way of being around people like that. So let me give you an example, because this is what really struck me in that episode. And, this is a little aside, but it's, I'd love to hit you with this and see what you think about it, which is, let's say that you're just a party today in 2018, and you see a friend of yours goes up and talks to their ex, whom they had a really nasty breakup with, and there's real bad stuff that happened between them, and you see them having a conversation. As a friend, you might think, I'm going to go over there and separate them, or just go by and inject myself into the conversation just to make sure that my friend's okay. That would be, some people may not do that, but some people might. I see all the other Trills that are on board the space station just sort of stand there and let it all happen. And they're just like, oh, it looks like she's doing this incredibly taboo thing that's going to be destructive and possibly lead to her death. Well, I'm just going to stand here and eat my cake and look at it. It's just, I got annoyed at them that, like, you're not helping your friends, which...
I feel that Jadzia did. And I think that's something that separated her. I mean, we don't see a lot of Trills in Star Trek. She's certainly the one that we see the most of. It's tough. I mean, who knows if the motivation is, I trust that person to know what's best for them, and that they know what's worth interfering in and what isn't worth interfering in, and just how much of it is for the writing and for the story. I don't know.
I gotcha. It's just something that struck me. I wanted to see a little bit more brotherly love from I think that was actually her brother, right? Lenore Khan's brother, if my memory's right. And he just says something to her at one point, and then he's like, oh, you got it. But it seemed to me that, like, Trill society would have developed more ways of dealing, because this can't be the first time it's come up.
Yeah, well, and we never really, we got an idea of what it takes to go through the process of becoming a host, but we don't get a lot of insight into Trill society or really into how they mentally and emotionally prime someone to be a host.
Right.
So I should be plugging a book I probably haven't read. I know there are some really great books about Dax out there. that I should read sometime, and maybe that explores those topics
Okay.
more broadly.
All right, let's return to Discovery then. So you were talking about talking about the kiss. You're talking about seeing Stamets and Culber have their kiss in the episode.
Yes. So you're gonna hate me for this.
I don't hate.
Quickly, I'm talking. So what I'm trying to do is the buildup of where Star Trek, Star Trek's history with representing queer or LGBTQ community, culture, and people, how it has approached it over the years. So we go from where it's being explained away to Star Trek Beyond, where now Sulu is gay, and we see from Kirk's perspective, we see, we hear Sulu talk about his husband, and we see a picture of him and the daughter, but it's when they're returning from the mission and you see Sulu go into the arms of his husband, and his daughter's right there. And
at Starbase Yorktown, if memory serves.
And I started bawling when that happened, and I'm going to try not to cry again. It's something that was so needed. And I mean, this is a minor thing. And again, the LGBT community, certain people still have an issue with it because it wasn't enough. Like, this was a very, very small part of that film. But it was so impactful for me to see that it brought me to tears. And I still become very emotional when I think about it. So just having that very small representation was something very important to me. So obviously, when I found out that we were going to have a gay couple in Star Trek Discovery, I was so excited. It's one of the things that I have looked to the most, because, and again, I feel bad because I'm probably going to reiterate some of the discussion that I had in the Disco Trek episode, but...
Well, then let me offer you a question to respond to that, and we'll see maybe where we want to go with it. Yeah. When you see this as far as representation, why is it so important to you to see it in a Star Trek episode?
I was just going to answer that. So I could give you the very easy answer of, even though I'm not a gay man, I still see myself. And we have not gotten that representation in Star Trek in this way before. Really, the bigger answer is that there is still a very large part of the world, especially here in America, that for some reason believes that queer life, gay life, however you want to say it, is just a pride parade every day. And that we're just big and loud and throwing glitter everywhere, wearing our rainbow clothes, and that's what being gay is. And it's not. Like, we're just people like everyone else. We have regular relationships like everyone else. And so even whether it was Stamets and Culber kind of teasing at each other and bickering a little bit, or just standing in front of a mirror brushing their teeth, which happens in previous episodes. And I would still note that the minute where, I forget exactly how they say it, but Paul Stamets is like, the ship was in danger. And then he says, "You were in danger," to Culber. It's just so real. Their chemistry is amazing. And they just it's just a beautiful representation of what love is. And gay love is the same as any other kind of love. And so, to see this relationship, and a healthy relationship at that. I've talked about the fact that we don't always see healthy relationships in Star Trek. And though we didn't get a ton of time with these two together, I get the impression that they have a pretty healthy relationship. But even that moment when they were in the bathroom, I'm like, where's the kiss? Where's the kiss? I want to see him kiss. And part of this is also, I just think that Stamets and Culber are just an adorable couple. They are my favorite couple in Star Trek now. It makes me all warm and fuzzy. And this is where I stop being eloquent, because I'm just so giddy over it. Having that kiss, part of it was just, again, like, here we are in Star Trek. There are no excuses anymore. We have broken through the glass ceiling. I know that's something used for women, and I'm sorry to steal it for the gay community here. But it's just like, finally. I don't want to talk about what happened to Culber.
No, well, to ask some questions about this, Heather, and I want to proceed in a way that I want to be in partnership with you. I don't want to be in opposition on this because I'm not. So, but I want to ask some questions.
Yeah.
Star Trek Discovery Season 1 premiered in 2017. And let me just offer a statement and then you can respond to it. In 2017, in pop culture and in television and media, seeing a gay couple is just not even a little bit unusual anymore. So why was it such a big deal?
Because it was in Star Trek.
And why does that matter?
Because it hasn't been in Star Trek before in this way.
So okay.
Yep.
Okay, no, go ahead, and I'll come back.
So the LGBTQ community has not been able to fully see themselves in Star Trek until that kiss happened. And can I tell you just a very quick thing?
Sure.
And so our friend Matt Hansen, who is a gay man, was our guest on Disco Trek last night. And fortunately, this won't spoil anything because that episode comes out before this one. But Matt said that he has now had his Whoopi Goldberg moment. So most Trek fans have heard the story of when Whoopi Goldberg was a child and saw the original series and saw Nichelle Nichols on the TV. She called out to her family and said, there's a black woman on TV and she's not the maid. Not in those words exactly, I don't think. But, that was the moment that, a black woman got to see another black woman on the bridge of a star trip in, an important authoritative position. And so for people like Matt and the rest of the LGBT community, that was the same moment where we finally got to see ourselves in a show that we love so, so much that in many respects has failed us previously.
Beautiful. One of the things that we talked about previously is that Star Trek has been a cultural phenomenon and has pushed forth ideas that were challenging to the audience in a lot of ways and was really leading in some areas, and we talked about the first interracial kiss. We've talked about, we didn't talk about this in particular, but integrated crews was a big deal for a long time. But it seems to me that based on what you just said, it was really about just playing catch up and not really pushing the envelope. Is that about right?
Yep, absolutely. It's playing catch up, giving us that visibility, and then emphasis on just having a couple that is like any other couple out there, because we are the same as everyone else. Yes, we do have a pride parade once a year where we go all out and wear rainbow stuff and throw glitter. And the history of that is a very sad and tragic one if people want to look it up and educate themselves as to why there's Pride Day and Pride Praise and Pride Month. But yeah, it's not so much about breaking any ground or doing something that no one else is doing. Obviously, there's gay representation out there in other TV shows. It just hasn't been in Star Trek before in a way like this.
So, No, do you have another thought?
I have a thought, and again, it's going to lead down a rabbit hole, and I don't necessarily want to go down that big rabbit hole. It just pertains to the death of Culber and the fact that unfortunately, after we get this wonderful display of representation, that character gets killed off. And it got a lot of pushback from the community because on one hand, it certainly falls into a trope called kill your gays, where unfortunately gay characters die or otherwise suffer some tragedy that somewhat suggests punishment for being gay. I don't necessarily, when I saw it and had discussions about it on a Disco Trek, it's something that I did discuss because I did feel at the time that it very much, unfortunately, fell into that trope. And I don't necessarily know that the writers or the cast really meant that to happen. Listen to Disco Trek Into the Force I Go episode to get my full thoughts on all of that.
The only thing I want to say about it, I'm sorry. The only thing I want to say about it is that it really annoyed me that the show writers spoiled by telling us immediately that they were going to do something different and it's not what you think it is, and Culber's coming back and it's all going to be okay. I don't like being spoiled like that, and I guess they felt like they had a little bit of a backlash and they wanted to get ahead of it. Mm-hmm. But just as an observer to it, I didn't want to be spoiled. I was happy to go along for the ride.
I agree. And I think that it is a symptom of the fact that they had to know what was coming. They had to know that by killing killing one of the only two gay characters, like truly out and gay characters in Star Trek, that they would get this kind of pushback. And, when it happened, I was angry. I was even angrier that in the following episodes, we were subjected to seeing it over and over and over again in flashbacks and previews. That still upsets me. But I have reached a point in fandom where there is so much toxicity right now among varying fandoms. And there is so much external toxicity in our nation that I have plenty of things to be angry about. I'm tired of being angry. I have resigned myself to trusting Wilson Cruz and Anthony Rapp. I think that if they truly felt that this character death fell into that trope, they would have walked away. Both Anthony Rapp and Wilson Cruz are very active advocates for the gay community. And I can't imagine that they would have stayed if they were offended or thought that their characters were being misused or mistreated in some way. So while I still have issues with it and I'm still unhappy with everything that happened, I am sitting back and looking forward to seeing what happens in season 2, and we will go from there.
Heather, you talked about how powerful it was for you and for other fans that you've talked to have this representation in the show. One of the things you specifically mentioned, actually, though, was the Whoopi Goldberg moment, right? Of her being a young girl and seeing the Lieutenant Uhura on the original series and what that meant for her. Do you feel that Star Trek's ability to be a cultural phenomenon in 2018 with Discovery is limited, and that representation has less power to actually affect anything because the show's behind a paywall, or no?
Yes and no. I very truly, well, I paid my $10 a month, and I will continue to pay for Star Trek as when Star Trek is on TV. I am disappointed that it was put behind a paywall. I understand, recognize, and appreciate the quality of production that we got that paywall paid for. But when I talk to other people out in the wild, and I have very many Star Trek tattoos, and as I said, I wear a lot of Star Trek clothing, so people ask me about Star Trek out of the blue pretty often. And I say, oh yeah, there's a new series, and they are oblivious. So I'm hopeful that the more Star Trek grows, as we know that we're getting, potentially 3 or 4 more series and more movies, more awareness will spread and more people will sign on to CBS All Access to see this. I think that as far as representation goes, representation is still important for Trekkies who've been around for 52 years. So for the people that are paying to watch Star Trek, that representation is still impactful, is still important, and may still trickle down to other people who say, there's a gay couple in Star Trek, have you seen it? And maybe someone else will sign up for All Access and watch it to see it. Or there are a plethora of very strong female characters, many of whom are minority characters. Have you seen it? And more people will come. I wish that it had been available to everyone and not behind a paywall. But at the same time, I value what we got because of it. I don't know that it would have been the same series, the same quality of series, if it hadn't been funded with that investment, we'll say.
Let's turn to another episode. Let's talk about Si Vis Pacem Parabellum. Most meaningful episodes to you. Heather, explain it.
Oh, man. I'm allowed to get deep, right?
You're only allowed to get deep. If you want light Star Trek banter, this is not the show for you.
No, none of Heather's shows are the shows for that. Maybe the animated series shows. Okay, so this is a Saru episode, as we're told. And I struggled with Saru in the beginning because, well, I think he's very awesome. You know, he's our alien. He's played by Doug Jones, who is phenomenal. The makeup, the look of Saru is really great. I did not understand and couldn't identify with a character who lived their life in fear all of the time. I've been in a lot of situations in my life where fear has certainly played a part, or anxiety at some level, but I've never been officially diagnosed with anxiety or had it to a point that it interfered with my ability to function in life and stuff like that. As I mentioned the beginning of the episode, when I started watching Discovery, I was in what I know now is an abusive relationship. And so Discovery started in September. And by the time this episode aired, I think this was right before Into the Forest I Go. If I remember, I was about to be thrown a big loop. I had just built a house. I had been living in the house for 5 months, and my partner over Thanksgiving, he was my fiance, decided he no longer wanted to be in a relationship with me, and gave me some bogus reason for that. And so all of a sudden I own a brand new house with somebody who doesn't want to be with me. And so, okay, we can deal with this, I thought. And things were okay for about a month. And then he went on a trip and returned home. And I don't know what happened, but he was so extremely aggressive and hostile towards me that I had to call the police. And the police advised me I needed to go somewhere safe. That as he had not physically harmed me or anything, they couldn't remove him from the house. But if I did not feel safe, I should leave. And so that is what I did. I wound up never going back to the house except to move my stuff. And the following 7 months, that's a whole other podcast, but let me sum it up by saying that I was in fear of my life. I was in fear of my life. I was in fear of my animals' lives. I had to leave one animal behind because technically it was his. And I basically was thrown into an ocean of anxiety. So I began to understand what it was like for Saru. And I've been able recently to go back and if you had asked me about this episode before all this stuff happened in my life, and let me quickly say that my life is much better now. Eventually the house got sold. I'm in a much better place. As I said, I've got a boyfriend who loves Star Trek Discovery and is wonderful. So I don't want to depress anyone or worry anyone. Everything is okay now.
That's good news, Heather, and we're all very glad for that.
Thank you. And I'll talk about how Star Trek community played a part in a little bit. But this episode, so if you had asked me before all this happened about this episode, I would have said it was the weakest episode in season 1. And that was difficult for me because we were told it was going to be the Saru episode. And I tend to get really excited and think, oh, we're going to get a character deep dive. Because that's something that's like just such a part of Star Trek's lifeblood is these standalone episodes where they're focused on one character and we get to know about them. So we're going to learn where Saru, his planet's name, and what the predator species was. And I had all these expectations, and that is absolutely not what happened in this episode. And we see a side of Saru that I don't think people really understand. He goes to the planet and he's overwhelmed by the vibrations, the noise, the sensory overload of Pavo. And so the Pavans help him. And I think, John, you may have been on a Trek FM. Did you talk about Saru?
Yeah,
Okay.
we did. And I think one of the issues not an issue, that sounds like a criticism, it's not. But one of the things that was on my mind as I watched this episode, and in fact, all the episodes of Discovery, is that I read the first Star Trek novel right when it came out, which I believe was right when the show went on the air. Mm-hmm. And in that novel, there's a lot of Saru's interior monologue, and you see a lot of how he thinks about things. And so I understood from that book his mindset and what is going on inside his head. And so when I would see him do things in the show that sometimes other fans would say, why is he doing that? I don't understand it. I totally got it. I was like, it's totally explained if you read the book on how he thinks about things and why he is the way he is. And I can't separate in my head the book Saru from the TV Saru, which I guess is a testament to how well integrated they were. And it was really nice to see how they were very much in alignment, which sometimes you don't get. The books can sometimes be, 3 standard deviations away from what you see in the show. But in this case, they certainly weren't. And in fact, they informed each other in a very powerful way. So I, like you, watched this episode with Saru, and I was like, yeah, I get it. And at the end, when he's like, oh, no, that wasn't the Pavans controlling me. I was really doing it, which it was very un-Star Trek, right? Because in every time they do something like that previously, they're always like, well, it wasn't really him. He was under control by the aliens. And he's like, nope, that was me. I totally got it.
I think that you had likened the interaction with the Pavans to like addiction, right?
Yes.
Okay. And I thought that was pretty profound. So where you saw this metaphor for addiction, I saw a metaphor for control. And this is one of the things that really was the foundation of me better understanding and identifying with Saru. Throughout these 7 months, I really felt like I had no control over anything outside, like concerning the house, knowing if my dog was okay or not, just knowing if I was going to be safe, wondering if he was going to come break into my apartment, stuff like this. So anytime that something worked in my favor and I felt like I had control, I had this very noticeable feeling of A, peace, and B, power. And so to me, I saw that side of Saru as being in control and then empowered. And it wound up being a very literal interpretation because we got to see a real demonstration of the power of a Kelpian, which I think a lot of us were not expecting. But
his donkey kick of Burnham was something that was burned into my brain. See what I did there?
He crushes the communicators in his hands. He's running fast like a gazelle. He does the donkey kick. Like, this is a side of Saru that we've just never seen. And it just finally, after all this that I've been through, I just get it. Okay, I'm not going to cry. I get it. And so I have been extremely grateful that I can finally connect with that character, even though it kind of came from a very difficult place in life to be able to do that. I can identify with Saru, and I can find a lot of strength and comfort in Saru, especially after reading Fear Itself, which I think is still in your pile of books, John.
It is. I know. I just started it. I'm about 20, 30 pages in.
Oh, gosh. Well, I hope that you love it as much as I did. I thought it was just such a wonderful exploration into Saru.
I think what you should have said is, I hope you will relish it as much as I.
Oh, yes. Well, then I hope you will relish it as much as I did. not only did I got to read it, I bought the book and read it. It's still a privilege to get to read these books, I think. But then I got to go on to reading Trek and talk about it with Marty and Justin Ozer from Trek FM. And that made me love the book even more. So I'm just so happy that I've been able to really understand and get to know this character who I thought was really interesting and neat, but was kind of like, I just not sure about this. And now I know. And so I kind of feel empowered because of that. And I think it's, even though my connection with that character now is very personal, I think that Saru is certainly a metaphor for someone with anxiety. I realize now that my anxiety quadrupled in measure, that I very likely have had anxiety my entire life and just not truly understood the impact that it had on my life. And now I certainly do have PTSD from the relationship and from what I went through afterward. And I'm more excited to see what the character goes through, because despite his struggle with fear, he still overcomes it. He still manages to be a leader in Starfleet and an acting captain, just someone that is truly admirable. And so that inspires me. And that's very Star Trek, right?
Well, I think it's one of the testaments to any great storytelling that people can watch it and take different things from it. I did see it as a story of addiction, right? Is that he had this thing in his life that was something that he had that there was this darkness, he had this fear, and it was like an addiction, right? And he finally got to be free of it, and he would do anything to remain free of it because it had been so terrible. And you took a different thing from it, which is okay. I think that these different interpretations are what makes a story worthwhile and makes it powerful and interesting. Heather, we've had a pretty wide-ranging discussion. We've talked about how you explore your fandom. We've talked a little bit about STLV. I want to talk more about that in just a minute. We've talked about the meaning that you found in some of the episodes. We've talked about what you think some of the best episodes are. I just want to put a simple question to you, but I think it's a pretty profound one, which is, what do you think Star Trek is?
I think there's, what do you think Star Trek is, and what does Star Trek mean to you? Because I think that...
Well, tell me which one you want to answer.
Well, let me just put it this way. When you say, what do you think Star Trek is? To me, Star Trek is my family. I think Star Trek is a much bigger thing than that. I think Star Trek is a very good handbook for how to be a better person. And I wish that Star Trek was required viewing for kids in school. And I'm so very grateful for all the stories I hear where an uncle or a mother or a grandfather sat down with a child and their family and introduced them to Star Trek, because that's where it starts for a lot of people. And I wish that everyone was a Trekkie. Yes.
How has Star Trek helped you become a better person?
So, big question.
Well, you brought it up. You said it helps you be a better person. So I want to interrogate that for a minute, because it sounded like it was something that meant a lot to you and something that you thought a lot about. So I think how you've applied that to yourself is a fair thing to explore for a minute if you're open.
Yes, I will try to do this without crying.
Tears are allowed on the TrekProfiles podcast.
Okay. So a little thing that, well, people know it about me if they've listened to my podcast. I'm a person who suffered from depression my whole life. Once you have depression, for me, it never really goes away. But I have been able to overcome parts of it to the point where I don't take any kind of medication for it. I'm able to function very well. And part of it, and this is, please understand, this is not like a recommendation or a catch-all that if you are this way, it will fix your depression. It's not. Depression is relative and it's a very personal thing. But for me, I started practicing gratitude every day, which I sit down and think about all the really great things in my life. Even when things are terrible, I can still find one thing that is good. And that has helped me fight through the really dark times. Out of practicing gratitude, I became an optimist. And I like to think that although this happened before I started getting involved in the Star Trek community and watching Star Trek has really contributed to my ability to maintain that optimism. Like we've said, for a while, Star Trek was a show that I watched on TV that I really liked. And then I started to get involved in the community via STLV. And at first it was just attending conventions and making friends. And it's, here I've got these great new friends. They're really cool people. This makes my life better because I found a community. And then I started managing the unofficial Star Trek Las Vegas group on Facebook. And that became crucial because I realized pretty quickly that, as we know, social media, despite all of the wonderful things that it adds to our lives, can also create a lot of negativity. And so I wound up creating an environment there that promotes a safe, positive, inclusive space. And so I get a lot of enjoyment out of cultivating that and out of helping cultivate this community of Trekkies, most of whom are my friends. And when people come to me and tell me that they do feel safe in that space, or that, the questions have helped them have a better STLV experience, that adds a lot to my life. So then I started podcasting. And number one, I was really looking for a way to be creative. I felt that, I have a job that I'm passionate about. I'm a business owner. I'm a woman business owner, which is extremely empowering. I created a successful business out of nothing. So that's really great. I have some other hobbies and whatnot, but I didn't have a good way to be creative. I used to write, and I've kind of had a permanent type of writer's block. I'm not confident in my writing anymore. But I started podcasting, and it was just supposed to be a podcast about STLV. Hey, we've got a community here. Let's tell people how to make the best of their experience. So I got together with Jeff and start recording Shore Leave, and almost immediately we get a lot of great feedback. So I feel like I'm contributing to that community, and I am getting gratitude and appreciation in return. So that keeps me optimistic and happy and makes me feel like I'm doing something important. And then I start using my voice and talking about personal subjects, personal stories, talking to other Star Trek fans about their personal stories, which I know you resonate with this, John, because this is what your podcast is.
You bet.
There's so much value in telling our stories. There's so much value in using your voice when you're a person who feels safe in doing so and confident in doing so, because not everybody does. And so I've just further been able to give and receive from the Star Trek community. And then along those lines, I became a managing partner in the network. And Jeff and I have taken, what was a very small network with one show, and with people like you and Jim and Marty and Will and Shashank and Barry and Ian, we've built this wonderful podcast network where we are, contributing even more to our community and getting this positive feedback. So again, we're promoting an inclusive, diverse, positive part of Star Trek fandom in a time where there's so much toxicity out there. So that's just more and more good stuff that comes into my life from Star Trek, on top of going to STLV and building this family. I mean, between podcasting and running the group, I never leave STLV because it's always with me in those ways. It's made me a better person.
Go ahead, sum it up. No, I think you're doing really well.
I'm trying. It's made me a better person because in sharing my stories and using my voice and getting feedback from our friends, from, listeners that I may not even know in person, it gives me the confidence to keep doing this and to keep trying to help empower others through my work. And so now it gets to the really hard part where I'm definitely going to cry. 7 months ago, when I had to leave my house, I didn't have money. I spent my savings on building a house because I thought I was going to live in that house for a very, very long time. I did not expect to have to move within a matter of days. And I mean, technically, sure, I could have gone back to the house. And I will tell you now that I don't know if, and I'm not exaggerating because I saw things in the house when I had to go back several months later. I could be dead. The only way that I was able to move out of my house, move into an apartment, and afford that was because I started a GoFundMe thinking that maybe some people would donate. And I raised a very substantial amount of money, and probably 85% of that money came from the Star Trek community. It didn't come from my family. It didn't come from people I went to high school with or to college with or local friends or clients from my business. It came from the Star Trek community. And while so much of it came from people that I know, people that I don't know, that only know me through my podcasting or my Twitter, gave me money because they told me that I helped make their life better. I try very hard, as I said before, to be someone who represents what Star Trek is. And Star Trek, I think, if anything, is a show and a community and a lifestyle about being positive and optimistic and believing in a future where we can all be who we are without judgment and discrimination. I try really hard to be that person because I want everyone else to be that way. And I want to live in a world where it doesn't matter what color you are, what sexual orientation you are, what you do for a living. You are accepted because you are a living, breathing, beautiful human being. And so I feel like, despite being told 7 months ago that I was a selfish person who had done nothing with their life, had not built their business or done any self-improvement, I was told I was not loved by the person I was going to marry. And I was told I was not loved from the beginning of that 6-year relationship. And so you can imagine that I felt pretty awful. And I knew that it wasn't true. I know who I am. But to hear those things from someone who you have sacrificed for and invested in for 6 years, it's a very, very awful thing to hear. And I feel like what happened was the Star Trek community stood up and told me that I'm worth it and that I'm valued and that I'm more than what he could ever have said about me, that what I'm doing has meaning, that when I talk about being a queer person, when I talk about sexual abuse that I've experienced in my life, when I talk about these very deep personal issues, it helps other people. And that's why I think that podcasts and participation in groups and telling our stories like I am now and like you do with all these fans, I think that it's so important and so crucial to continuing to keep this spirit of Star Trek alive and this camaraderie and love. I am comfortable with myself at this point in my life, largely because the Star Trek community accepts me.
And we do. And,
thank you.
It's true. And for the listeners who've never done anything like this, podcasting is a very solitary activity in a lot of ways. I mean, you record in a room by yourself for the most part, right? The ones we do. There's other options, obviously. And you make up these episodes. You spend a lot of time editing them. And I'm not talking about my show. Just in general. And you put them out into the ether. And you don't know if anyone's out there. There's a song that I love, and one of the lines in there is, "Are you out there? Can you hear this?" And you were out there putting yourself out there, making all these podcasts, doing a lot of the soul-crushing work of moderating these groups, which, was a thankless task on the best of days. And, you think, is anyone out there? Can you hear this? And something terrible happens to you, and you put up the signal, you activated the distress call, and Starfleet sent in a squadron from, all the quadrants of the galaxy to help you out. Mm-hmm. And I think that is a beautiful and touching and very moving example of Star Trek being made real in the real world. It's one of the conceits of this show, of this show, Trek Profiles, that Star Trek is a show, but it's more than that. It affects how people live their lives. And you needed some help, and you got it. And I can think of no finer example of Star Trek made practice, put into practice, than what you just shared. So thank you for sharing that story, Heather. I think it'll touch a lot of people, and I think maybe somebody out there is having a tough time, having a rough patch, and they'll realize that there's this community of people who are optimistic about the future, who will offer them an outstretched hand if people ask for that. And I think that's what this community is all about.
I do. I say frequently now that Star Trek saved my life, but I mean, truly, the Star Trek community saved my life. It was fans just like you and me that live normal lives, and terrible stuff happens, and out of nowhere these people come and lift you up. And so I've told everyone, like, I will never ever be able to repay people for their generosity except to pay it forward. And paying it forward doesn't necessarily mean that I, spend $1 everywhere here, but I will continue to, as I say, I be a torchbearer, not a gatekeeper. It's something that's become very important to me. It came out of Discovery. At the end, Michael Burnham says we should be torchbearers. And with some of the recent issues with toxic fandom, I think it's more important than ever that we be torchbearers and we do what we can to support other Trekkies and other just people. Like you don't have to be a Star Trek fan to deserve love and support.
Not at all.
It's not just about us. It's how we can further help our communities outside of Trek. And hey, if you get some new fans because of that, that's super awesome. But I can safely say that I never expected Star Trek to change my life. And Star Trek has not only changed my life, it has improved my life. It has taught me who I am as a human being. And it has introduced me to so many people who are just phenomenal, brave, amazing human beings. And when I say that you're my favorite on Twitter, which I do all the time, I mean it. Star Trek people are my favorite people. And especially... Oh,
I was a little sad. I thought you meant I was your favorite people.
You are.
I'm sorry. I'm trying to have a laugh. I had to have a laugh. I'm sorry.
It's okay. I know I'm serious and I'm deep, but it's all because of Star Trek that my life is so wonderful now. And like, yeah, I went through a really awful time, but I've never been so excited to go to STLV. I think I will cry every time I see somebody because it's just been a very emotional year, and I'm so grateful for everyone's generosity and support.
As we record this, STLV is a few weeks away, and it is my intention to have this episode drop before STLV. Never any promises, but that is my intention. And we're doing some things like at Tricorder at the event, and there's parties and things, but I want to specifically talk about with you the Night of Diversity. And the thing that I think is so important about that is that we're not just throwing a party, but we're actually trying to help other organizations, right? It's an example of what you're talking about paying it forward. So why don't you talk about that for a minute and what we're hoping to do there? Because I think it follows on exactly to what you're talking about, that you needed help. You sent out the distress call. We all got on warp drive and we were there. What is Tricorder doing in that same vein?
So I do want to give full credit to William Conlon and Marty Ali, who are our hosts of Reading Trek, along with Tyler, Madison, Eric, probably forgetting somebody. There's a small little group of people who are truly doing the work behind this event. I am doing very little. I am participating in some ways and helping do certain things, but they came to us with this idea because we wanted to have a safe, positive space for the LGBTQ community and for everyone else. I mean, it's Night of Diversity. So the two charities that the raffle proceeds will go to that we're supporting are the Center, which is based in Las Vegas. We specifically wanted to contribute back to the community that is hosting the Star Trek convention, and then the Crib, which is out of Chicago, and that was recommended by a friend and attendee of STLV. Both of these are LGBTQ organizations that focus a lot on youth and providing for youth in the community. But all of the proceeds from the raffles are going to go towards that. And so we've been working together to find as many contributors. We've got some really, really cool stuff for the raffle. All of those proceeds go directly to those two organizations. The event is free. You don't have to pay anything to come in. You just buy raffle tickets to enter to win these things. And we're hoping that we can walk away with a substantial amount to give to these communities because it's important. And this is a thing that Tricorder does. We raised, $400, $500 through the sale of our STLV badges in the unofficial Star Trek Las Vegas convention group last year. And that was all donated to Leonard Nimoy's doctors. His doctor has a team and organization that does an extensive amount of COPD research. And so we donated that money directly to that research. So it's something that is truly a foundation of the Tricorder transmissions. We love people. We think that people are important, and we want to support everyone, as well as just continue to promote having safe spaces where there is no bullying. No one is made to feel that they don't belong. It's so important. I think it's a great thing. And I'm particularly gratified to see the Center being one of the charities because my wife and I have supported them for years. And I got some friends on the board there. And it's a really excellent charity here in Vegas. And I'm sure the other one in Chicago is as well. So I think it's going to be a great event. And I think it's a great example of what you've been talking about is that Star Trek is about optimism about the future, and not just having that optimism, but also making it so. Please forgive me for saying that. Now, Heather, I have to admit, I've enjoyed our conversation. I've enjoyed talking about your fandom. I've enjoyed talking with you about these episodes, and I'm really touched by hearing the story that you tell. But I have to tell you that the M5 is angrily signaling me, as we speak, that it is time for the Kobayashi Maru. The Kobayashi Maru is a challenging and difficult test, cunningly prepared by the M5, not by me, by the M5. Should you not only survive the test, but pass it as well, the M5 will award you an honorary Star Trek title. Are you ready, Heather? I'm ready.
M5, load the Kobayashi Maru simulation and prepare to record Heather's responses.
Working. Simulation loaded and ready for use.
Question 1. Pick the color you find most appealing. Dr. Crusher teal, Data gold, or Riker red.
Dr. Crusher teal.
You go to the Replomat for a snack, but it's broken. You're really hungry, but there's only 2 options: nasty Ferengi low-carb beans or disgusting and preposterous Jumja sticks. What do you have?
Low carb beans.
You are struggling with a major life issue. You need some counseling. Lucky for you, there are 2 highly trained Starfleet counselors available, Ezri Dax or Deanna Troi. Whom do you pick?
Ezri Dax.
Time to relax with some recreation. Will it be a nice game of Chula from Move Along Home, starting at the first chap, or Fizbin from A Piece of the Action, but with the Tuesday rules in effect?
First chap.
Question 5. The infamous Q appears to you and pays you a visit. He is going to go back in time and save one of these Star Trek characters from certain death. All you have to do is pick one. Jadzia Dax or Tasha Yar?
Jadzia Dax.
Simulation complete. M5, please compute the results and tell us if our guest has passed the Kobayashi Maru. Heather, I am pleased to tell you that the M5 has calculated that you have passed the Kobayashi Maru simulation. Congratulations.
Oh my gosh, thank God.
And now, the M5, who has analyzed your answers, will award you an honorary Star Trek title on behalf of our podcast. M5, what title shall we award our guest?
Heather is awarded the title of Sub-Commander of the Vulcan Expeditionary Fleet.
So there you go.
Oh, that's impressive.
Nice. Heather, please tell people how they can get in touch with you.
All right, the best way to find me is on Twitter. I'm LLA Posper, which is LLAPAWSPER, and then you will find me adminning the unofficial Star Trek Las Vegas convention group on Facebook, along with Jeff Hewlett and Jesse Akendo. And then, of course, you can find me here on the Tricorder Transmissions Network via Shore Leave, Disco Trek, or many of our other podcasts. I like to be everywhere.
Wherever finer podcasts are sold, you'll find Heather, right? Heather, thank you so much for being part of Trek Profiles.
Thank you for creating Trek Profiles, and thank you for having me.
Here ends this installment of the Trek Profiles podcast. And before we offer a Trek quote to close this episode, I'd like to remind you that you may send us your eternal pledges of devotion, suggestions for Kobayashi Maru questions, or plaintive wails of grief to please make the podcast stop to feedback@trekprofiles.com or on Facebook or Twitter at Trek Profiles. Anything you send us may be used in the show or may be brought directly to sick bay like some weird space cheese. This week, I leave you with a quote from Mr. Spock, who in the episode Devil in the Dark said, quote, "The Horta has a very logical mind, and after a close association with humans, I find that curiously refreshing," unquote. Thanks for listening, and live long and prosper.